Buenos días, estimadas y estimados colegas. Es un gran placer darles.
Good morning, dear colleagues. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this workshop organized by the Institute of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and CEFIM. Today, we are going to talk about the increase of renewable energies for the non-interconnected zones in Colombia. We have analysts, I'm an analyst from OECD, but first, let me give you some announcements regarding this virtual meeting. We have simultaneous interpretation services available today. If you want to listen to all the interventions in only English or only in Spanish, go to the interpretation section on the bottom of the screen and choose your language. One important point, if you are using interpretation services and you are going to speak, please remember to turn off interpretation before speaking. I mean that if you are going to speak, please turn off interpretation services and turn it on again after your presentation. We are all used by now to virtual meetings. Just a reminder, keep your microphone on mute unless you are going to speak. If you want to speak while another participant is speaking, please erase your hand with the Zoom feature and wait for the moderator to give you the green light. It is a pleasure to introduce Jose David Insuasti, CEO of IPSE, who will give us some opening remarks for our event. And then we will hear Cecilia Tam, team leader on Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization Program at OECD, who will give some remarks. I give the floor to Mr. Insuasti. Good morning. Let me begin by thanking CEFIM and OECD for giving us this space. I want to thank all the organizers and all the people who are joining our event. Thank you very much. We are going to have two sessions. We are going to talk about promoting private financing for renewable energies in the non-interconnected zones in Colombia. I have a couple of short stories to tell you, which are behind the reasons why the public utility, being public service is a passion. When I joined this institute in 2021, I realized that evidently the government had a goal at the Energy and Mining Ministry, and we were undertaking this process for bringing power to all of these zones. But I had never gone to any of the non-interconnected zones in our country. Suddenly, if you don't have a general map of Colombia, you don't know where these zones are located, let me tell you. Colombia is a very diverse and large country. It is subdivided into regions or departments, very different amongst them. We have two coastlines on the Pacific and on the Caribbean. Many different territories, many different regions with huge challenges regarding connectivity and a lot of work due to poverty, the lack of accessibility, lack of roads, and lack of developments, but the government has been working to provide them and enlarging these services. But this was information I was not completely aware. I did not know the percentage of electrical power coverage that was an issue in these areas. I will share some slides with you. If you could please stop share, I will share some other slides that I brought with me. Thank you. I was telling you that the Institute has a chance of giving visibility to an issue, and it's the issue of these parts of Colombia, these regions that are farthest from the cities. And I say farthest because going to these regions is complex. There are no access roads, just development is under process. There's no tourism, there are no hotels in these areas. Some are accessible, they are known, and in some of them there's a little tourism, but the reality of inhabitants in these areas is pretty complex. These regions cover over 50% of the national territory. These include the Amazonas, Baupés, Guainía, Guayviare, the whole Colombian Pacific, and the High Guajira, which are known as non-interconnected zones because the national grid does not reach this area, and that's for different reasons. It's not because of distance or accessibility. For example, if you go to the Amazon area, the grid doesn't reach there because there's no access, no highways, but there's also conflict reasons that prevent the grid from reaching these areas. The government has been working and making this present in many areas. Coverage is increasing. Access to power has been improving. But the point here is to highlight the problem, and the issue is, what does it mean to be in a non-interconnected zone? There are about 657,000 families living in non-interconnected zones, so less than 3% of the Colombian population. The first challenge is that these areas are pretty wide. For example, Comariu, this is a municipality, the largest municipality in Colombia, about 65,000 square kilometers, where less than 25,000 families live. That is the percentage of inhabitants, or the density is about 1 inhabitant per kilometer. So it is a challenge for connectivity. No highways, families live kilometers apart from each other. It is a huge challenge, and therefore we have to find a different approach for universal coverage. And these are the families that we are serving from the Institute. 237,000 families have some type of power because they are at the municipality main city, are close to a highway, close to a road, and there may be 30, 50 families, and there are 420,000 families that still have no coverage. It is interesting to look at this. We need to work on promoting private investment and new models, because we need power for these 427,000 families to get access. But additionally, we want the other 230,000 families to have better access, better service. And for these 230,000 families have energy 100% of the time. We need additional installed capacity to provide them with service. Because of these 230,000 families, approximately 154,000 families don't have permanent service. They receive 4 to 6 hours of power a day with diesel generators, and about 87% of the power in these areas is diesel generated. So there is a huge challenge with non-conventional renewable sources. There is a challenge to enlarge and improve the power service, and there is a challenge for providing universal coverage. If we wanted to give power to these around 400,000 families, and we were able to provide 100% coverage, we will need over 300,000 kilowatts just to cover basic service. But my message here today, in something that will be mentioned in the next discussions, is that power is an activator. Power allows many other public services to reach the areas like internet connectivity, having a connection, start work in a different type of interaction and trade. And we estimate the minimum vital, which is 1 kilowatt per family of availability, which will allow families to have at least one fridge, one TV. But as families begin to understand the dynamics, communities see that power and public services allow them to undertake new activities, and the demand will begin to grow. This is just the first step. This is just a little sample of what we are expecting, but there is a huge challenge for growth in these areas, not just for increasing coverage, but for give these 154,000 families to have 24-hour power a day, non-polluting energy, rather than having only 4 to 6 hours of power a day. The government has been making historical efforts in order to provide power to 80,000 families for the first time. These are figures to May the 30th. In June and July, this number has increased by over 3,000 families. And we're not just talking about figures, 80,000, 3,000. It's not figures. Every family is important. Every family counts. Every family is waiting for the government to provide them social benefits and public services. And this policy has reached families in the farthest places of Colombia. And this is important, and we must emphasize that we're not just reaching the farthest places, but we have reached places individually. Out of the 80,000 families officially registered as new users of the power service, 32,000 have been connected using solar panels individually. And these are people who have power at home, 32,000 families, home to home. The Colombian state is using different sources, national sources at department level, at municipal level, and even cooperation models have been able to connect families in the hardest to reach and farthest places in Colombia, providing them with solutions. We have improved the power service with 8,000 families who had only 4 hours a day, and today have power 24 hours a day, thanks to projects such as solar farms that improve availability in the communities. So what is IPSE doing, and why did we organize this forum? Our institute wants to make public and private investment more dynamic in order to diversify and to bring efficient solutions to the farthest communities through different projects that have been developed by the communities. And we also want sustainable investment programs. Every year, our institutes identifies, prioritizes, and structures projects go to bid with public and open sources, and also goes accompanies all the public and private initiatives that want to harness this type of investment. We talk about making dynamic because we want to foster participation of communities, public sector, and private sector in the projects of non-conventional renewable energy sources that on the one hand can provide universal coverage, and on the other hand can improve the power quality for so many families. These projects follow a sustainability, long-term sustainability model. And therefore, our institute opens an invitation to you to not just come and listen to the speakers in our panels, but for you to start using the different tools, start getting more familiar with these areas, and start realizing the great opportunities there are, not just to attain the social objective of connecting so many families, but in the middle of this process to consolidate an energy model that is profitable even for companies who decide to invest in uninterconnected zones. The Institute also wants to consolidate itself as an entity with a value strategy in the mining and energy system, and therefore IPSE is a strategic articulator to mobilize projects and to foster sector articulation by promoting institutional modernization. Some of you have heard about what the Colombian government has undertaken as a transformation. Our institute is in the middle of this transformation, becoming a leading entity in projects and working with the mining and energy sector, the Minister of Mining and Energy, with all the different entities in this sector. And the aim is to generate knowledge, value, and development in the energy and mining sector. I want to finalize my presentation, but talking about advancements in the regulatory area. As a background, there were some laws, Law 142, 1994, the law of non-conventional renewable energy sources that was modernized in our country, and then a 2007 law for subsidies, and that was before our administration. The administration defined a roadmap for energy transformation that includes several chapters. Energy includes the modernization of the sector, and under that, we are promoting a series of mechanisms and regulatory messages that give us a lot of more certainty for different possible financial models in the non-interconnected zones. There was a resolution for rates for individual solutions from the CREG, which is the regulator, and there is a final resolution. Another resolution, a transitory resolution, was issued for subsidies for photovoltaic solutions. It's going to the final consultation. A decree was issued by the Ministry of Mining and Energy for the grid operators to give service not just through the traditional national grid, but through the logistic networks that are networks that work through humans and that can bring new subscribers into the grid. There is another law for energy, for gas. There is a draft for updating the law of non-interconnected zones subsidies, and we are finalizing an agenda working with the CREG, and where IPSE is also working to promote it. It establishes the final rate for individual solar solutions with a document focused on solar solutions. We are executing a consultation for operating in non-interconnected zones, and we are also developing a unified model for the non-interconnected zones power rates. We are modernizing the sector. This sector is going to give legal certainty for anyone who decides to invest in these models. While the state has been updating its regulatory process, this was already possible with the prior regulations. It was possible. And it was so possible that we have two projects in the Pacific and in the westernmost area, Bichada, where Puerto Carreño is located. In these two places, there are private power generation initiatives that have consolidated non-interconnected markets, one using biomass, one using solar panels. and the regulations and modernization of the regulatory framework allows models like this to provide greater certainty and to offer clearer messages in the regulatory area, and that will allow these projects to be brought to the Amazon, to the Pacific, to the High Guajira, Cauca, Putumayo, and all other areas in order to bring power to Colombia. I don't want to go further. I just wanted to invite you to tell you a little about interconnected areas so you can fall in love with them and you can come and walk with us through this project. And in this webinar, we will discuss different strategies that we want to foster for this transition in order to provide universal coverage for the benefit of Colombia. I want to thank the organizers and I want to thank all participants for your presence today. Thank you very much, and I hope that this will be really beneficial and enriching for everyone. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Cecilia Tam. I head up the OECD's Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization Program. And I'd like to add my warm welcome to everyone for this workshop on unlocking private finance for distributed renewable energy in Colombia's non-interconnected zone. I'd like to thank our counterparts at the Ministry and the Director of IPSE, Jose David Insuasti, for having invited the OECD-CEFIM program to support Colombia's clean energy transition in the non-interconnected areas. I'd also like to thank the team who we've been working very closely with over the last few months within IPSE, including Lenka Bukova and Lina Cruz, for all of their hard work and collaboration, and to my colleague, Lila Davies, who's been leading this efforts for us. We are delighted to see such a range of participants in today's workshop, and we look forward to hearing your inputs and suggestions on how we can unlock more private capital. Notably, we'd like to thank the Ministry, DNP, USAID, IADB, Findeter, and Bancolombia for the presentations that they will be providing later today. The OECD-CEFIM program has been working with Colombia through our counterparts at the Ministry of Mines and Energy since 2019 to strengthen the enabling conditions for finance and investment in clean energy. And next slide, please. The government of Colombia should be commended for setting such ambitious targets to reduce emissions by about 51% by 2030, and for taking a leading role on climate action in Latin America and the Caribbean. Legislation such as the Renewable Energy Law of 2014 and the Energy Transition Law of 2021, as well as successful renewable auctions, have helped to tap into the country's abundant renewable potential, with 2.5 gigawatts of grid-connected solar and wind to come online this year. The government should also be commended for developing a number of policies to supporting distributed renewable energy in off-grid zones, which can provide least cost solutions for electrification, as well as providing wider socioeconomic and environmental benefits. Indeed, there is also an abundant potential for renewable energy in non-interconnected areas. Across Colombia, potential for solar generation is high by global standards, with about 4.5 kilowatt hours per square meter per day. This is higher still in areas such as San Andres Island in the Caribbean. Colombia also has above average wind potential, in particular in the La Guajira region. In our previous CEFIM report on bioenergy, we also highlighted Colombia's strong bioenergy potential. This stakeholder
Cecilia, I'm sorry, the interpretation is not working.
Go ahead. It's on off. Should I have it in English?
Sí, ahora sí. Sí.
But it's not us. Each of the individuals need to turn on their interpretation button to Spanish. So if everyone looks at the bottom of their screen, there is a global icon. And if you push that function and hit Spanish, the interpretation should work. Okay, I'm almost finished anyway, sorry. This stakeholder workshop is part of an OECD study on unlocking renewable energy finance in Colombia's non-interconnected area. This work looks at the measures the government of Colombia can take, working with domestic, regional, and international partners to build upon current efforts to scale up investment and finance in distributed renewable solutions. Lila?
That's all good. Thank you. So I want to build off both Cecilia and sorry, my director, the director's comments about the potential in non-interconnected zones. Indeed, renewable energy in non-interconnected zones represents a small but growing opportunity. You can see this in the installed capacity, which has changed from 2020 to 2021. Of 300 megawatts installed, only 16 were renewable generation, but a further 20 megawatts was added in 2021, doubling this share from 6 to 12% over the period. This shows that interest in renewables is growing, particularly thanks to the transitional tariff that was put in place, as mentioned by the director. And under strengthened policy conditions, momentum is poised to pick up further. Policies have in particular supported increased investment in standalone solar solutions, as you can see in the figure here, which represent a least cost business model to reach remote communities. There has equally been an increase in hybrid mini grids, which can reduce the cost of fuel supply, the cost of fuel supply for diesel power generation. Continuing these efforts will be an important step to help manage the government's expenditures on energy subsidies in non-interconnected zones. For example, in 2018, of 70 million spent on tariff subsidies, maybe 40% was dedicated to the payment of fuel supply. The cost of renewable technologies has fallen drastically over the last decades. Yet the upfront capital expenditures of renewable energy is still higher, of course, than fossil fuel generation or diesel generation in particular. This means that there are greater needs for upfront capital in the form of equity and debt. As seen from the director's presentation, a few renewable projects are now being financed 100% privately, and it will be important to continue to mobilize private capital for these types of projects. This is particularly important given the level of investment foreseen under UCME's Indicative Electricity Expansion Plan, the PEEC. This plan highlights the need for $2 billion in investment on renewable and hybrid solutions. As seen also from the previous presentation, these numbers here, looking at 500,000 households, are reduced to 420,000 over the period since this PEEC was drafted, which is just to be celebrated. The estimates of these costs are also based on connection costs per user for hybrids, mini grids, and standalone solutions of around $5,000 per connection. This cost remains significantly higher than global averages, which is around $2,000 for mini grid connections and as low as $500 for standalone solutions. This points to the need to have a better understanding of what is driving these costs and how these can be reduced. This represents a sizable investment in the upcoming years and really highlights the need to effectively target government funding and development partners towards strengthening investment conditions and crowding in private finance. This brings me to today's agenda. This workshop will be organized around two sessions. The first aims to explore the landscape for renewable project development in ZNI, and notably the drivers of costs and risks in current project development. This first session also intends to explore the investment needs from the perspective of stakeholders who are already operating in the space, including grid operators, public service companies, and technology suppliers. In the second session, we're looking at current efforts through government and development partners and development banks as well that are in place to already strengthen conditions for private finance. This session will also include a roundtable discussion where we will look at solutions to scale up private finance and investment at suitable scale to meet electrification needs, and also to proceed with the replacement of diesel mini grids with hybrid and renewable solutions. The purpose of this workshop is really to have a dynamic conversation on current challenges and solutions. So I encourage you to raise your hands and ask questions and to actively participate in the roundtable discussions. I'll now pass over to Lenka Bukova, the co-organizer of this event, to moderate the following sessions.
Buenos días a todos. Les damos la bienvenida a la primera sesión de nuestro...
Good morning, everyone, and we welcome you to our workshop today. And I am going to give the floor to Mr. Rodrigo Prieto, who is the Minister of Mines and Energy, who is going to talk about the updates of this policy in the non-interconnected zones. Welcome. Good morning. How are you? All of you, good morning to everyone. Okay, I will try to share my screen. And please let me know when you are able to see my screen. We can see it right now. Thank you very much. So we are going to begin. Yes, please. Good morning to all of you, and the idea of this first presentation is to show to you which has been the result of the regulation of the ZNI, non-interconnected zone, and how or what are the goals from the standpoint of providing energy to the users. So we have started with the reviewing of the regulation and some very clear objectives in order to improve the availability of information for all the stakeholders and to improve service, to improve how to render the service. And of course, there are very clear rules of the game in order to promote private investment along this line. So in the first slide that I prepared for you, we are speaking about very general topics that the IPSE has already talked about it, the milestones for the regulation and the next steps. The main milestones that we have here, we should have to stress out that the progress in the regulation was very stagnated until this government. If you see, the main background are coming from 2007, 2008. So there is a huge gap until 2018 where a new regulation was passed. But as of 2020, we started having a different pace and a different hue. And that's what we would like to show you so that you can identify how is the sector moving forward. So the main background that we have in the milestones for this regulation is the resolution 091 of 2007. Here, all the rates were set for the law, the energy rates. I mean, we have systems with micro grids. So that's what we have been doing with this regulation. So this rate is the one that is still applying for all of us. We can, for example, have the diesel there, the diesel topics, the FNCER, etc. Here we have the transmitting systems, the grids, and all these activities. So this rate, as we can see it, since 2007, hasn't been updated. And this is the one that we are still using. So important thing of this milestone is that we are speaking about updating all this because we have a different law legislation. That's why we are not addressing it right now. I mean, the depreciation costs and the subsidy costs are different. So they are out of the market. So for the rest of the ZNI, we have the application of this rate. So in this regulation, we have the diesels and all the remunerated charges for the service providing, the commercialization, and also a very important activity, which is the activity of monitoring, which is being used a lot right now. The important part here is in the technologies is that most of the technologies are diesel-based, but the framework of this rate is where we can estimate the hybrid rates, those that we are aiming for to have this hybrid install capacity energies with non-conventional sources. To distribute and to market them, they are very simple laws, and this is the initial status. It is very important to tell you that in the general rate formulation, we are including the monitoring, which is being done by the National Monitoring Center, which is financed by IPSE, but it's being financed with their own resources. So the idea is that in the medium term, we are able to start to receive these rate incomes in order to provide this monitoring in the distribution grids. And with this, we are going to have a more sustainable activity, and then they are going to have a very paramount role in the monitoring. So we also have the explanation on how this ZNI rate works and how they are regulated. This means that if your technology, your generation technology is expressly mentioned in this resolution, you can only estimate the rate. You have to publish it before applying it, and then you can apply it. I mean, you do not need a specific resolution of this rate or charges if you use specific technologies that are under this distribution law. For example, if you have hybrids, biomass, conventional energy like wind energy, etc., you need to ask for a specific resolution for the rates. And then an important part in this resolution, which is being updated because it is from 2007, is the transition from the ZNI to the SNIN. I mean, there are new markets to be traded, etc. So the drawbacks here have to do with the transformation of those companies that are operating as a ZNI to become 100% stakeholders in the SIN regarding resources, guarantees, the obligations in order to guarantee the demand, etc. So to upgrade or to go further to a more stringent market has created lots of issues, even for the projects that are financed with public resources. That's why it's very important to address this transition topic. Just after this rate was issued, the resolution 182138 in 2007 was issued, and we are working with it, and we have the subsidies in the ZNI. Why is this important? Well, because the rate is 100%. I mean, sorry, the CU is 100% of what the service provider can charge to the user, but this has to do with the amount that is paid by the user and the amount that is paid by the state because of the subsidy. So this is very important for the sustainability of all the projects, taking into consideration all the hindrances that we may have in order to collect all this money, because the part that is financed by the subsidy is something that is fixed, and the state is going to honor their obligations regarding this commitment. So it is in this subsidy regulation that we have the scope is all the ZNIs except the exclusive areas, as for example, the private sector. Here, the subsidy is the difference of the CU, the cost of the ZNI, and what the user is paying, which is the rate of the SNI. I mean, all the users in Colombia are paying the same rate which is exactly the same rate as if we should have the SNI. So from this resolution of 2007, we set out this principle that the subsidy was about all the user paying exactly the same, and the remainder is going to be assumed by the subsidy. As you know, we calculate the SIN, which is a CU, which is lower and more efficient, and we obtain the rate that the user of the SIN has paid, which is in the market, and the ZNI are going to pay exactly the same. So that principle is fixed and it's going to continue. We have some important items regarding the restriction of the subsidy for the minor localities, and this is impacting at the long term. How does this work? We, in this resolution, the ministry set out that for certain localities, for example, the capitals of the municipalities, etc., it was possible to subsidy up to 24 hours of the rendering the service. So this means that for each energy package, the service provider is going to guarantee the subsidy, and they are going to look for the part of the users in order to have sustainability. Nevertheless, due to the scale economy of these markets, energy price is higher. So from this resolution, we fix what we have called the policy for the subsidy hours. So here we have the different sizes of the localities, which are between 3 and 50 users, and they have the hours of the day, 4, 5, 8, for example. And in the last one, 151 to 300, they have 8 hours a day that are included in the subsidy. And if we are above this, they can apply to the 24 hours. So with this, the service provider is going to limit the provision of the service to these hours, because above this, they are not going to be supported by the subsidy, and then they can recover the part that the user is going to pay. And the part of the user limited the supply, and we have lots of localities that are very limited, but we are working with this. So what else do we have in this regulation? Everything that has to do with the measuring and the invoicing or billing of the consumption in the localities that are under 100 users. I mean, we have to make a micro measurement per user, but this is something that historically has been an issue because the installation of the meters user to user has been very difficult, and it has impacted the sustainability of the service providers because they cannot collect all the CU from the users, and also all the monitoring that you can do from the service. Another important part of this regulation is that the service providers have to report all the information to the SUE system. So they have to have a permit in order to provide this energy. And this is because the suppliers are the ones that are going to provide the information on how much they collected, how much they provided, et cetera, et cetera. So if we do not have this information, it's not possible to continue subsidizing the energy. And as I was telling you, we have huge milestones regarding the regulation, and the next milestone, it was in 2007, and now it's in 2018. It has to do with Resolution 038 of 2018, which is regulating the self-generation and the distribution of the ZNI. It's important to clarify here that distributed generation, as defined in this 038 regulation, is a generation near the consumption center. So you can have, for example, the national interconnected system. You can be a user that are in the northern part of the country, but as we have a national transmission system, et cetera, the energy and the energy source that you are consuming could be in the south part of the country. So that's why we are speaking about this. Nevertheless, in the ZNI, when we have the CGS service, generation is close to the consumption center because it's not included in these huge grids. That's why it's very important to emphasize this, because the technical name to the service providing of the ZNI in the cases where we have distribution grids or microgrids are taken into consideration in the areas in this that are in the generation zones of this regulation. What is missing here? Because we need more documentation, more legality, more technical requirements as we are growing for all the connections, etc. So this regulation has a content regarding the content, and they are telling us that the cell generators that are very small, they do not have to sign it. But it explains that in order to define the connection conditions, we have to be subject to the with the regulations that are applicable in this very moment, or the current regulation. And it's also explaining about the technical standard to set out the availability of the system in order to have new loads. So we have the information system for the service providers when they are going to address the topic of who is going to be connected to this distribution center, and the availability of the information about the grid. And it is also bringing a very, very poor regulation. It's also speaking about the obligation of the ZNI that has to do with the activity of self-generation. It modulates a little bit the regulations or the activities among the stakeholders. Then they are speaking about the conditions and procedures for the connection, a little bit also about the conditions for the measurement of the self-generators. And it's important to take into consideration that any project that we have to develop in the ZNI that has distributing grids is falling within this resolution 038, and also in the 091, which is about the rate. So we have the regulation of 2007 and then the 2018. So you can see lots of years have elapsed and it has not been updated. So with this, we have to set a new pace. We have resolution 166 in 2020. Here we define a transient rate for the photovoltaic solutions in the ZNI. This first resolution for the rate is a result of the logic of having a sustainability regime for all the companies or the people that are using the photovoltaic systems. And really, we have made very huge investments since 2017 in individual photovoltaics, but we were missing the definition of the rate. So here, we took advantage of some standards that we had during the COVID pandemic, and we issued a different rate during this pandemic for the photovoltaic system. The first proposal, as I was telling you, was for the sustainability of the photovoltaic that were financed by public resources. So we didn't really address the regulation of these photovoltaic parts. And it was a very, very simple rate. It was a fixed amount per month, and the component of the OM of the generation, and they were all fixed, constant at the national level. And that the investment in the generation was estimated based on the historical cost of the photovoltaic for the public sector. So here you can see how we are profiling and moduling this rate. Then, after launching this rate of the individual photovoltaics in 2020, the ministry issued the subsidy that corresponded to this. And this is a little bit more specific, because here we are speaking about the specific conditions for the rate. The conditions are, for example, a power above 500 WPs, and I mean, watts peak, And according to this, we set the subsidy. And why? Because that subsidy is providing the subsidy for the AOM component and the commercialization component. Because why we are not subsidizing this other part? Because we have to give a part of this rate to the users. Then only to the AOM, not to the CAPEX. And here we are progressing in this topic because for all this subsidy for the photovoltaic, we are including all the sustainability public investment for this procedure. This is something very innovative because the resolution of the subsidy, the general one that we explained to you, that was the 18038, because of the date, it's not including any of this information. Nevertheless, the one of 2020 has the procedures. Now, I am going to go faster because we have a regulation which is under construction. So this is what we have consolidated. You can see 2020. Now, what are the next steps? We have all the photovoltaic, individual photovoltaic rates. You have seen that we have issued a transient rate. Nevertheless, in this, we have the traditional rate here. And in this rate, we have made some optimizations in order to capture all the concerns of the agents. So here we have to use 2 years because they have to go to a consultation. So the depreciation depends on the availability and not the consumption, because we have to make an investment to have a service available. And we started understanding a little bit more the private resolution. This resolution that was issued in 2020 has had some adjustments. Here, for example, we have some document 040 has some adjustments. Here we have an advisory, the hard advisory, in order to make more dynamic the costing of the pieces of equipment and to see which are the useful ways to use them. Here we have the modeling of the logistic cost at the municipality level, so it's not the same price for all the pieces of equipment for all the country, but we have different costs. And finally, we ended in the topic of issuing this rate. And finally, we had document 051, which approved the rate. The rate is already approved, but the Ministry of Commerce has to verify some things about competency and rights, etc. I mean, the rate is already approved by the Commission and it's being reviewed. So the ministry sends some comments, a resolution, which is a subsidy for that rate. So in these last weeks, they finished their last Saturday in this resolution, they are stating that they have to identify the users and the users that are going to be benefit by this, because this is very expensive and subsidy is very expensive. So the issue of focalizing or visualizing the end users is very important. They have to be very isolated, very remote users. I mean, we have to identify all the users that are going to be benefit by this subsidy. So this rate is including a range from 0 to whatever amount according to the installed capacity of the system. Nevertheless, we took into consideration, we think that it is not feasible to subsidy very small systems because they are not going to benefit some inhabitants, and these installations are very, very costly and expensive. So we try to have a range that has to do with, and according to the consumption profiles, we are only going to subsidy the service which is equivalent to a monthly generation between 50 and 96 kilowatts a month. So for the effects of subsidy, we are asking for a minimum consumption. Why? Well, the rate, which is the CU of CREP that is being used, is in this first section that you can see in this formulation, is part of a collection per daily investment, plus a collection for management and administration on a daily basis. So you obtain a daily amount and you add them up until you have the final amount that you are going to charge. I'm sorry, I am hearing somebody speaking in the call? No? Okay, thank you very much. So this is the final part of the subsidy, and this is a consumption factor, the result. If we have a minimum consumption of 30%, because if you are a user that have a very small reduced energy need and you have to install a huge system, you are not going to get to this 30% consumption. So this limit basically you have to size the pieces of equipment for the specific user. What else do we have? The experience and the development of the law, and this here we have some discounts. The service provider has to guarantee that it has to be done along 10 years.
And this is regarding regulation and construction. I am over my time, so I go quickly over the last slides. This is the rates, and this is the CREG, which is a regulation for ZNI. And basically, in here, these are the requirements, and we are specifying the obligations for every stakeholder, and going quickly over this due to time constraints. I would like to highlight a few things. Distributors will have more obligations. Here they are increasing the load on the investors. They are developing different rules for coordinating operations, etc. And we are increasing coverage in ZNI because distributors only had a function to serve the user, but not looking into increasing demand or increasing the size of coverage in the different areas and different towns and cities. We are also working with measurement and meters when we are also increasing the role of the National Monitoring Center, or CNM, who monitor the generation and distribution of energy. By reinforcing CNM, we will attain sustainability of all of the improvements and better quality indicators. And we are also working in the transition from ZNI to SIN. Finally, and quickly, I want to mention two additional regulations that were issued this year, 701/005, which focuses on ZNI requesting public bids for different energy purchase and sale, because prices today are no public, the information is no public. So this is important. We are moving forward by making information public with transparency, concurrency, general procedures open to everyone. We are getting ready for Resolution 05 for bids, and the 006 regulation, which is a transitory rule regarding the term of contracts in order to begin with the bids. And well, I know that I'm over time, but I would like to talk about a transition. There is a very important article here, Article 26. It's about liquidity during interconnection, and there is a representative that dispatches energy, but there are some other providers that have not finished transition into SIN, so subsidies cannot be generated. So you have to have this regulation And we have another article 27, just for ZNE, for subsidies to generators using non-conventional sources, because diesel generators already have a liquidity mechanism. There is another very important topic. This should be a decree about the CNM, or the National Monitoring Center, and activities of follow-up and monitoring of ZNI generation and distribution assets. And there is another important part, which is determining the objectives of the monitoring and follow-up activity and the remuneration for the follow-up and monitoring activity. It is already part of the rates, but the final estimates, the final calculation should be made. And this is going to allow us to go more in depth into analyzing monitoring. And also the government will designate a monitoring operator. We've been looking into different possibilities, and whoever is in charge of CNM, which will be financed by the rate, will continue working in a self-sustainable model for ZNA that will help us with this a long-term solution. And then also in this 2099 law, there's Article 35 about the requirements of suitability, financial capacity, and experience. Providers must demonstrate making commitment to ensure sustainability of financed assets. And finally, another article that is relevant for ZNI is Fond Energía, which is a fund. We are using a fund that is independent and administered by the state, and there are some other funds administered by the Ministry of Energy, and they will all be brought together. And this will lead to an autonomous fund that will in charge of the transactions. So this is all we have on regulations from the 2099 law. Most of these articles are open to comments, except for Article 32. So we are moving forward in developing the law to set the path for the electric service in the short, mid, and long term. I want to thank Rodrigo and the Ministry of Mining and Energy for your participation. Rodrigo, thank you very much. The idea behind this workshop is to have a lot of participation, to look at the barriers to investment in ZNI and look at different perspectives. I see a few raised hands, but we still have to give the word to operators who will tell us about their experience. And after, we'll have a roundtable and we will all participate, and we have time for comments. So I'm going to give 5 minutes to each operator. Edith Arteta from Helios. They generate and market energy nationally and regionally with over 6,000 users through PV energy in both individual and autonomous, working mainly in the Guajira, in the Colombian Caribbean area. Thank you very much, Edith. The floor is yours. So tell us about the projects that you are developing in the ZNI. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I am Edith Arteta. I am part of Helios Energy team. We appreciate spaces such as this one, where we can come and give information to incentivize private financing in non-renewable energy. We are a public service company. We provide services in 21 municipalities and 9 departments nationally, concentrated in the Caribbean area, mainly the High Guajira. We have different projects, and in this area, especially because it requires special attention. We offer service and maintenance in ZNIs through individual PV solutions and a hybrid plant, which is located in Uridia, which allows us to provide a service to Nazaret and Puerto Estrella. Our projects include investment to increase power supply in the ZNIs in Colombia. Our plant in La Guajira will substitute diesel generators, increase coverage through solar solutions, and will modify energy of lead batteries into lithium, and we will provide 24-hour service. We must improve the service quality. As we said, it's not just about interconnecting a family, but providing them a quality service that helps them improve their living conditions. And for that reason, we are working on projects for over 2,000 families. As you can see on the right, each dot are, yes, a family. They are geo-referenced and cataloged. This will help us to provide them with energy. The best solution or the best alternative is not always a microgrid because other factors must be accounted for, such as dispersion, the number of families, and access. And therefore, as project structurators, we've seen that the best alternative is to provide individual solar solutions to these families. We have challenges and risks. One is the difficulty of negotiating with companies or associations providing services with obsolete solutions. And there are some public associations that will suddenly find it difficult to work with other operators. There's also a variation in prices of equipment and material and logistics. Logistics issues, costs are high and they are undervalued by people who develop their projects. And we believe it is important to be especially careful with the cost of structuration and the risks that are really important, risks that we believe should be linked to the national government, such as developing financing lines dedicated for ZNI, which are structured and customized based on the nature of these projects. The national government in the last years has been making efforts to bring power to families in these areas, and our projects have been developed thanks to the fund of the FAN, or the Fund for ZNI, and the national budget through IPSE, and the general system of royalties that has made huge investments in these technologies, allowing us to bring power to these families. We believe that the most important part here is to give legal stability and incentives in 15 to 20-year terms for private entities investing in such projects, allowing each family to receive basic power service. So that's all on my part. For any questions or comments, I will, this is my contact information, and I believe that these events are very helpful. They allow us to get in touch, to get interconnected, and to work in these projects. Thank you very much, Edith. I'll give the floor to the last speaker of the first session, Mr. Juan Diego Gomez, General Manager of San Colombia. They generate power and they provide service at ZNIs. Juan Diego, the floor is yours. Good morning. Let me share my screen. Good morning. I am Juan Diego Gomez. I founded Sun Colombia, and I am going to present some of the challenges we've been facing in this ecosystem trying to get coverage. One of the biggest challenges in underdeveloped countries, as the director said, is to get connectivity, find those points where the traditional grid becomes very costly or obsolete. There have been different developments in the last 10 years, like a drop in price of solar energy, new storage, and new technologies. But one of the most important events is the possibility of decentralizing service through different financial inclusion models. For example, in Africa, where we find the best or the largest experiences and where financing has been focused on solar energy, starting with lamps and the whole electrification model with microgrids and with different funds and different institutions investing, but they all coincide in one thing. Bringing energy is a mechanism of financial inclusion. So in the 10 years this company has existed, we have always been looking into different scenarios to solve these issues. So we have energy, we have renewable energies, solar systems, and more complex systems like modular systems, back-grid systems, which are basically systems in populations where power service is bad, regular, faulty, or telecommunication antenna, which are the best grid scenario where telecommunications providers must provide 100% availability and reliability. And then you go into a third scenario we have explored, which is energy hubs, which allows you to bring power to houses, but the budget will never be enough. We have seen through IPSE, the system has provided millions of dollars in coverage, and over 50% is still lacking. There are intermediate solutions through energized centers to offer coverage. We have different systems like water cleaning systems, energy hubs, and some other solutions that provide coverage. And then we start working, well, when we heard in 2017 about this, and when we started with the first PV solution method in 2016, and all that came with the resolutions from 2007 that made it a muddy playing field. So we started to working with a financial inclusion model through the Internet of Things, machine learning, and mobile wallet. And we developed this mechanism to address these two challenges. There is a big opportunity for using PV systems next to diesel generations to reduce consumption and to provide coverage to many houses that cannot be energized even with microgrids. This is a big challenge for Colombia because Colombia, next to Nigeria, can have one of the most progressive CapEx investment models in the world. Peru already gave some baby steps, and some things have been attempted in Latin America. Colombia is pioneering in ECOS. In Africa, there are some other models, but Colombia has brought to the table great opportunities for private investors, especially European investors who have never lived through the Latin American chaos, to turn their eyes into the electrification of Latin America. And the challenges is knowing your customer and bringing new services such as connectivity or microfinancing. And that's what really has pushed companies. There are some other challenges, especially on-grid digitalization, decentralization, the same effect that we saw at ZNA. ICE can be also brought hand in hand with the decentralized energy boom. So we have a mini holding now. Our company has a mini holding. We invest in different companies, IoT, turbo generators, decentralized energy, variable control. We have a software company with the only wallet in Colombia with a cross-cutting transactionality that allows us to collect the co-payment, which is needed for the public service will register that the user is paying for the service. We have a business model that has 4 vertical axes and design. We give consulting services to national institutions like IPSE or international GGI, USAID, and at a more regional or local level, we provide them with information on our experience as builders and operators, which at the end of the day is key for sustainability. If you can build and operate, you will build something that is sustainable. One of the strongest technological approaches has been developing a control electronics that understands us to understand the variables of micro metering and monitoring. We have a solution for model for on-grid solutions, but we had to go from the prior rate Regulation 091 to evolve as new updates were launched, so that once the final model was here, we would be controlling the variables that would lead to profits from delivering the service. This is just one layer. We can go more in depth. And the most important is to reach a model of inclusion where you can have access to different digital projects. You can have boards and you can generate transactions in communities, whether this community is focused on agriculture, on tourism, doesn't matter. This will give you different financial inclusion models and payment solutions. So when this goes into another stage, you can receive international contributions. We've been working with microcredits from 20,000 to 100,000 pesos through an international fund that lent us so that we could in turn lend. This has been highly successful. It shows that users are once they are recognized as users are willing to pay for the service, and we've proven it. We are the only company in the country that has invested in Pico lamps for rural electrification with small solar kits, 15 watts, that allowed us to learn about the marketing model. Aside from that, there are 21 software and 14 hardwares with a patent. Everything that's got to do with intercommunication, metering integration, and everything associated to solar power. Under the universal premise, anything that is offline and off-grid can be very efficient in the online on-grid model. And we've also been looking into a way of collaborating and delivering this information that to be used in the decision-making, particularly with IPSE. And all of this will help us understand the financial and technical behavior of solutions. As it's already been mentioned, we will know how much is being used of the energy that has been installed, and that is very important data for decision-making in the future related to investments. We looked at the minimum subsistence minimum, and then we saw some communities that consume more, others that consume less, and we are looking at the floor and at the ceiling. And looking at the floor and the ceiling, there will be solutions that can be subsidized with CapEx and some new rates that will help us. So this is our model. This is Tunco is a company that has went through the whole learning curve, bringing us to where we are. And right now we are beginning to operate through a concession model through bids with a national public service company with the assets. We are the techno partner in the background, providing the service for digitalization of this public service. And this will lead to evolution. Several public utilities in the regional and national level are beginning to use our software solutions that will help the user to remain, and they can be financed by the company. So this is utility companies, the closest thing to microbanking in these regions. So that's basically what I have to say. I had a very little time, so I tried to summarize as much as possible. Thank you very much, Juan Diego, for your intervention. We are a little bit short of time because, yes, there's a lot to say. There is little time. And I saw some raised hands. All participants are still connected, the CEO of IPSE and Rodrigo from the ministry. So if that's okay with you, let's move on to the questions. Leonardo Jimenez. Leonardo, go ahead. I remind you to disable interpretation services and go to original audio when you are talking. On the bottom right, where it says interpretation, go to original audio. Leonardo, go ahead. Thank you very much. This has been very interesting. And now that we have a representative of the ministry, the CEO of IPSE, I would like to say that our concerns are mostly legal and very specific. So we see that you are mentioning, well, our concerns have more to do with regulatory incentives for private investment at ZNI, and from the legal point of view, it's a second concern, and interactive public management, both from the legal point of view. So regarding private investment and the regulatory incentives, we understand that with large projects or hybrid projects at ZNI, necessarily, and it says so in law 143, it says that via rate and for the sale of energy, you have to fundamentally pay investments made. As Article 44 of the law 143. I'm not going to read the article, but it says that through the sale of energy, you have to pay, among other things, investment. So under the 701 paragraph 006, the maximum term, it's still under discussion. It is, yes, it is transitory, but it's still a matter of concern because of the signals the sector is sending, because you are limiting these contracts to sell energy to 9 months. We agree that it is competitive, and we understand there's a centralized management, contracting from the state, from IPSE, and all that is very important. But the matter here is, how can an investor obtain a return on their investment where the model to obtain is selling energy limited to 9 months? What project can be closed in 9 months? So I believe that this has to be, a revision has to be made, because you have projects in hybrid models, but the regulations are completely closing this model. And add to that, when the support Craig is using, or at least we have not been able to find any examples or any reasons to see why 9 months. So what I'm trying to say is that there's no background. There is where the Craig come up with this term 9 months. We understand that this is a proposal. We want to ask because we have this concern. And this was my second question. Public investment. The state has invested in the sedenites in assets. By law, these assets cannot be sold or transferred, and these assets belong to the public wealth, so they have to remain in their hands. So then you have public service companies that may be capable of providing the service, but then we have this gap. How will these assets be handed over? Because it will happen the same as in mines. First time, then law, I come and put my flag in this territory, and then the state or the entities will give the PIPs that you may have followed this route, giving them to the territorial entity, and then from this it goes from there. And it happened when the public lighting assets, and they said, no, you have to give competitive prices, but how did it happen? And that is not regulated. We understand that our decree will be issued, but there is still no clarity. So we must look into the concept of absolute liberty from the marketer to the user, because if you go to the other end is how can a public asset get to a third party so they can provide the service and at the same time get a profit? And how did you generate this competition element, which the doctor was mentioning right now? It's cross-cutting to the whole topic, the regulatory topic. He was saying, he mentioned the last resolution for the rates in solar solutions that were looking into different concepts. So these are my two questions. Why disincentivizing with a 9-month term, which will be materially impossible for investors to get a return on their investment because they cannot sign agreements for more than 9 months. And the second scenario, what is the sector thinking? So regarding public assets, how will it work for all the companies that want to provide the service? And thank you very much.
Now I am going to give the floor to the director of IPSE, first of all, and afterwards, Mr. Rodrigo from the minister. So please go ahead, you have the floor, Mr. Director. Hello, Lenka. Well, excellent questions, Leonardo. I think that first of all, the analysis that you have done is quite good. I have several considerations. I may not answer specifically why is this the term. This is a discussion that the OAS together with the commissioners have to do. What is important before the regulation that the CREG set out in the legislation is precisely that, or the fact that the activities that are currently being carried out in the non-interconnected zones are being separated. I mean, what we have been trying to do in the CREG is how to professionalize the service provision and to make equal the services from the non-interconnected and the interconnected citizens, and how these activities that are set out in the 142 in the practice are being connected. So along these lines, what they are saying is that the service provider, you that have these activities in these areas, you have to separate the activities of generation under a contract and also the commercialization and the distribution activity. So you have to break it down so that we are able to be competitive. And to this, we have to add the regulation, which is the energy buying or purchasing that has to be done through a public mechanism and through dissemination mechanisms for which the Institute is in the process of coaching in order to broadcast all these mechanisms. So what we are asking for them is that they separate all these activities in order to have a competitive process, and then through this process use the IPSE so that you can use a national dissemination process and use the most effective energy in this process. And then it's giving them some terms so that the trader carries out that process, the transition process, to separate, to divide the activities and to do it in a more orderly manner. Because the reality in our zones, our areas, the activity, creation, distribution, and the trade is done by one company, and it's being done there only one process, and they have become diesel traders, and they go to a group and they inject a diesel or some additional liquids to quote unquote maintenance, and they create the machine to work for 4 or 6 hours, and this is not working well. So the first thing that they have to separate the activities, and this is sending very important signals when you see or observe the regulation in a global manner, is that I am ordering you to separate the activities, and that the trade or the purchase mechanisms is going to be done through a public bidding process or tendering process, and the CREG is going to be the one that is regulating this. And some of the representatives of the ministry are going to be having this discussion. And if we are invited to this discussion, we will give you our insights, of course. On the other side, the second question, and if there is a place to improve, Leonardo, we are precisely in this type of fora and this type of situations, we are holding them so that we are listening what are the thoughts of the investors, the stakeholders, the private investors, because this is the moment to continue improving. And on the behalf of the Institute, we are taking all the recommendations in order to clarify our role, and we can be some intermediaries, of course, with a very clear role, because we are not the ones that have the last word. And the second one, I agree with you. I think that one of the huge challenges that we are experiencing in the sector is to close those regulatory gaps that from the law 142 and 143 had not been regulated completely. And precisely when we saw the presentation of the mining ministry, we can see that from 2007 up to date, there are many things that have not been regulated and are not very clear. They were updated in the regulation and in the decrees, the resolutions, in the law, and we are carrying out a whole updating regulatory mechanism but we have still pending issues. And we have to emphasize in the regulation about the assets. We've had some progress about the model that is providing the instruction to formalize the delivery through contracts or agreements, and to demand through those contracts some financial, technical, and legal characteristics that are specific. And we are doing this with the assets that the Institute already has, and identifying these regional potentials, and demanding for some policies, agreements of service agreements, etc., so that the service is more sustainable in the long run. So what's pending? We saw this in the Institute. We have some pending matters. That competitive process has to be given through a regulated model when the Institute wants to launch, for example, or to deliver one asset or one property. And we need to have an enabled platform for this processes of public tendering, because we do not have a mechanism yet, because we are not hiring the execution of a work. I'm not charging, or I'm not receiving an asset, but we are managing an asset that is part of the 142 law. And along these lines, it is worth mentioning that we, as Leonardo was mentioning, that we have to regulate this. We have been supporting each other in all the territories. We have been supporting ourselves with the service providers. And as Leonardo was mentioning, we have also to choose the users, and mainly in the structure model. And that gap was there, and we didn't know what to do. So what the ministry and the institute, I'm speaking for ourselves, what we decided to do was to support ourselves in a transient manner in the operators, so that they, through this work execution contracts, are guaranteeing not only the execution of the work, but they are also making a compromise with the sustainability of the work. So Leonardo, we would like to have a mechanism with which more open to different public and private service providers. We have to have that legislation, and the law has allowed us to deliver the finished projects through contracts that are allowing sustainability in a temporary manner. We have also seen that the current public operators are supporting us not only in the construction, but also in executing and sustaining the works. But I think that this is something worth to regulate, like other things, like, for example, how to enroll new stakeholders in the superintendency of the public services and the requirements, the participation, for example, of the communities in the service providing. So this is something that we need to still regulate from the law. And the regulatory agenda that the sector has had is to modernize the sector so that it allows new actors to enter, to come with us, and precisely to identify what are the things that we are missing to give a legacy that is completely structured in order to have the legal security in these interconnected zones. I don't want to use more time, so I don't know if the ministry can give me an answer in 2 minutes, and then we will go to the next question. Yes, of course, I agree. The important thing here is that we reach a situation where we have some public market signals everywhere. I mean, right now you cannot find, we know about this, we don't know where are they, which is the content of the connection agreements that have been undersigned by the different stakeholders. If we do not have this public information, we do not know which are the prices. So that's why we have to make an effort for the future to know the prices, to know which are the plants that are dispatching all this energy, so that we have a more public information system, so that in the future, the prices become public and the technology signals are also become public, combined with what we already have in the regulation about the preferent dispatch, and they become a public framework for all the stakeholders so that we can enter into the market. So along these lines, it's very clear that you can guarantee the sustainability of your investment with the PPA, but in some way, you have to divide and you have to start with the public items. So that's what we are doing in the CREG. And about these 9 months, we are not able, as external entities of the CREG, we cannot question why the new months. But even though this PPA is giving you some sustainability, you can have more sustainability if you have more time. So this is regarding the purchase and sale agreements. Thank you very much, Rodrigo. We are going to now go to our second meeting. I would like to remind you, please, to respect the time of your presentation so that at the end we can have another Q&A session. There is a last question. Sandra, will you please be very brief before going into the second part of our meeting? Yes, good morning. Thank you very much. Will you please tell me if you can hear us? Yes, will you please give us your name and who are you representing? Yes, of course, Sandra Grisales Lezama from Cuestión Energética. Correct. Yes, go ahead, please. I have a very short question, mainly for the mining ministry. We have seen very satisfactorily that you have made a huge progress in the regulation of the economic sustainability for the individual solar solutions. And we would like to know, how are you doing regarding the definition of the unique rates for centralized solutions? I mean, the update of the resolution, specifically in the project of the resolution that was issued in 2014, which defined a unique rate for all the centralized technologies of ZNI. And this is going to be very important because this is going to allow the exponential increase of centralized projects. So we would like to know what is the status of this. And we would like to know a little bit more about this. Okay, so I am going to give the floor to the director. If there is an additional question, you can write it down on the chat and we will answer to them at the end of our meeting. Please, you have the floor. Very briefly, in order to continue with our next panel. Yes, what the CREC did was to separate the regulatory activity. So we prioritized and we gave the rate for individual solutions, and it divided the 091 in all the regulations. I mean, this is a specific regulation for all the legal topic, all the activities, the creation, the generation, commercialization, etc. And we are building upon this. And it's working so that the regulatory agenda, there is an update for the remuneration. But the first thing that we have to define is which are the activities that are going to be paid or remunerated, or which are going to be the activities that are going to be included within this legislation, so that afterwards we can set the rates. So what the CREG is doing is that not the ministry, not ourselves know exactly the specific answer that you are looking for. What we are pushing all the time, as you are, to obtain this, because mainly for the institute who are on an ongoing basis with hybrid projects, we are interested in having rates and a very clear regulation on the remuneratory process in the hybrid project. So believe me that we will be with you pushing so that the CREG solves this issue. So we will ask the CREG and we will continue pushing for this to become a reality and to be part of the regulatory agenda. So we can continue. Thank you very much, Mr. Director. So we are going to go to the second panel. I would like to welcome the next presenters for our climate finances. Please go ahead. Thank you very much, Lenka. And thank you very much for this invitation. We are part of the climate finances, the DNP. And together with Luis Alejandro Noguera, we are going to make this presentation, and we are going to talk about the data that we have for the climate financing in the country. So the next, please, the next slide. Well, we basically have two main goals from this sustainable direction. We are promoting all the mechanisms and instruments to update the climate resources involving the private and the financial sector in order to create the resources in order to cover the climate scheme that we have. So we are working in strengthening the institutional capabilities by planning strategic actions for at the national level and on subnational level to create this favorable environment in order to finance our climate. Now, from this direction, we are the technical secretariat of the financial management. So since the committee, we are hardly working to involve the different levels of the national and subnational policy in the challenges that we are facing regarding climate financing. The committee is part of CISCLIMA, and we have people from the public and private sector. And one of the main challenges that we are working from the committee is the national strategy of climate funding. In this strategy, we have currently an updating process, but I would like to tell you in a very brief manner that we have two strategic lines that are going to allow us to work in the development of economic and financial instruments and to manage the financing sources. We have this together with the strengthening of capabilities, and we are managing knowledge and investigation. For example, we are going to tell you in a very brief manner the important aspects of the strategy that we're working on that are going to be very related with the topics that we are addressing about the challenges that we have in the non-interconnected zones from the DNP. We are the focal point for the green climate point in order to be able to mobilize all the resources that the country has that the country could create through this climate green fund, which is one of the most important parts of at the worldwide level in order to manage resources for the climate action. And within the projects that we have had, the country has created non-objection letters telling that private investors can come and bring non-renewable energy projects. We started, for example, with a project by accredited activity of the National Development Bank in the Netherlands. And these resources and these projects of funding are available so that they can access with their project to this funding mechanism. We are also working and we are going to tell you this about other aspects that we're working on the committee, and the strategy is the subcommittee of green funding. Through this subcommittee, we are strengthening and we are greening this development national strategy in order to allow that the National Development Bank create those mechanisms and instruments for the funding. Also, in the non-interconnected zones, for example, Bancondex and Findetel, among others, are creating funding mechanisms for non-interconnected zones. Another mechanism that we are developing the strategy in the financial sector, we are working with Naso Bancaria to create these green projects to be more and more accessible for the general public. We are also working with the microfinance associations so that we can create smaller projects and to manage resources for entrepreneurship, for SMEs and micro SMEs. And we are working in involving the private sector because the involvement of the private sector is very important. And we are also focused on our territory. With this, we are going to be able to have all the projects that we are driving may be, or we can have the possibility of funding them from the private sector and to mobilize resources regarding climate. Two important topics is the government launch in April, a green taxonomy. And with this, we are going to have finance assets to be tracked out so that we can start efficiently managing them in order to know which assets are green and how is that we can promote more green funding and mechanisms to fund projects for renewable energy that are not conventional. Also, From the DNP finance team, we have a financial DME in order to monitor the report and the verification of all the climate financing or funding flows. And we are strengthening the capabilities through a toolkit, which is going to allow us to be a little more dynamic in strengthening and stimulating the projects that we see that right now it's one of the huge weaknesses that we have. Precisely aligned to the needs that we have identified and the issues that we see in the mobilization of financial resources is that we are not very clear, or we don't see very clear how these projects are aligned to the needs of the investors and the climate sources, funding sources. This is a list of bottlenecks that are applicable for all the sectors. For example, we have lack of maturity in managing the projects. For example, the profile of the investors are not so attractive for the funder. And sometimes we have some grants, but there are some green mechanisms that could be worked or addressed from the private financial system that could provide a solution to the current issues in order to have access to fund some projects. So I am not going to go one by one, but these are some of the hindrances that we have for the climate funding. And to continue, I am going to tell you that we are working from the energy sector, from the energy cluster on the next, please. One of the mechanisms that we have from our direction is the climate funding corridor. And now I am going to give the floor to Luis Alejandro so that he can continue explaining you about this.
Good morning. Can you hear me? As Lucas was saying, one of the front works in the national climate finance system is a climate finance corridor to focus the financing to the territory needs for promoting a matchmaking between both parties. And there are a series of key considerations in the corridor. First, to develop a market model to comply with the Paris Agreement commitment, specifically under the agenda and the NS, which are the national contributions. We also want to provide solutions to foster climate finance resources mobilization from the public, private, and international sectors, and to set the roadmap to articulate the different sector and territorial needs with sources of financing. And in here, we are trying to structure a series of clusters. So this is basically how this climate finance corridor works. We have different actors with different projects like SMEs, territorial entities, unions, large companies, and heads of sectors. And we want to form a series of sector clusters to map the actors that influence compliance with the climate change agenda and prepare project portfolios. We have 6 clusters, one for energy sector, transportation, housing, sewage, another cluster for conservation with bioeconomics and nature-based solutions, commerce, industry, and tourism, and each cluster needs to define a series of portfolios and business lines. In order to develop the clusters, you have to look at a series of criteria, and the first is projects must be aligned with a green taxonomy and to ensure that assets are truly contributing towards the environmental objectives, to ensure the financing source that investment is aligned with the Paris goals. And once we have formed the sector clusters, when we have identified the actors for the portfolios, and once we've had a critical mass of initiatives, we can go down to roads. One, if the project is ready and it has a good financial and technical structure to be brought to the source of financing, it will go directly to the broker. The broker is a role of the climate finance that will help us connect with a source of financing. But there are projects that still don't have a structure or require to be structured in their development and in their preparation. And therefore, we have several accelerators that will help structure or strengthen the projects from the technical or the financial point of view. So, for example, well, it's not here, but we have the CFA, which is an initiative supported by the United Kingdom. An invitation has been sent. There will be over 60 projects that applied, but prioritization goes to transportation, energy, and this is a big chance. They work with blended financing. They want to improve projects through these combined financing that can bring in together different finance instruments in order to reduce risks and leverage the projects by using other instruments like credits, collaterals, etc. We've also talked with FENOGE in order to align with this climate finance corridor model. They have a pre-investment fund to support pre-feasibility studies for hydrogen projects. And additionally, they have a whole line of projects in non-conventional renewable sources. We are trying to articulate all of these items so that all resources that we are able to channel can reach an accelerator that will help us have a more robust project portfolio that can be brought to the broker who will help connect them with a source of financing, which is what Lucas was saying about work fronts and involvement of the financial sector. So this is our role. We are working with the Green Protocol, with the core of financial institutions. We're working on a framework prepared from the government and the financial sector, involving the banking sector, the investment sector, and the insurance sector, and a bilateral agenda with international cooperation sources, multilateral banking, and our knowledge of public sources in order to better harness all of this power in order to reach the source of financing. It is also necessary to understand economic and financial instruments that work as vehicles that will allow us to reach financing sources. So this is basically how the corridor works. Now, regarding the clusters, specifically the energy cluster, there are some key considerations. They are made up by entities that directly or indirectly have certain tasks and commitments to implement the goals in NDC. The role is to prioritize programs, projects, and initiatives that focus on the corridor, but mainly the broker, and providing a roadmap for projects and companies that can have an impact on NDC can find the cluster corresponding to the sector where they have an impact. So, for example, what have we been requested by the Ministry of Energy? As DNP, we are a focal point in the NDC partnership, which is a coalition of countries and partners that support countries to attain their goals in climate change, and we can help and we can channel certain requests. They are more than a fund, they are articulators, and we've been working a lot with them. Some of the requests is to develop a strategy for articulating the PIG at the territory level to the one at the PIG at the national level, to exchange experiences and training on CCUS resources for developing a CCUS pilot for the mining, oil, electrical, industrial, or general industry, providing workshops and training, reducing emissions by geothermal generation, and financing for the implementation of an H2 roadmap. This will be adjusted based on the needs, but right now that we are using non-conventional renewable energies, we are going into CCUS and green hydrogen and transmission grids. And to help close the gaps, we want to develop a series of short-term plans. Right now, we are identifying the different stakeholders for the different portfolios for a mapping. And in the future, if there is an opportunity with a certain financing source, we go to the map and we can begin working on the portfolio and follow this model rather than opening invitations or bids or calling for applications in order to keep mobilizing resources. Thank you very much. So this was a short presentation of our corridor. Lucas, Alejandro, thank you very much for your presentation. Now, I'm sorry, Lenka, but 2 slides are missing. It's just, we wanted to say that if you want to know more about our work on climate finance, you can go to this website. There is a course on climate finance. It has different capsules and models giving you all the necessary knowledge and information so that you can present climate-focused projects. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lucas and Alejandro. I try to remind you to make better use of time. We are 20 minutes behind. Now I am going to give the word to Thomas Black from USAID, who is going to talk about the role of development partners in the market. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lenka. Hello, everyone. Am I sharing my screen? Okay, can you see my presentation?
Esto es una presentación para sus comentarios y para...
I bring these presentations for, this is a model that's being developed by USAID to support private investment in the PDET zones. Looking at the overall challenge and from the perspective of a donor such as USAID, being able to stably attract private capital, private investment to PDETs, we are trying to increase the offer of clean energy in strategic communities. We are focused mainly on the implementation of peace agreements, and PDET is critical in the Havana agreements, which the current and the next administration want to help fully implement. We want to ensure financial and operating sustainability of faraway and isolated projects. It has not been mentioned today, but our history of faraway isolated projects is not completely good in terms of durability and operational life of projects. And we have to find a way to ensure financial and operating stability for these projects. Implementing a project with some money that was donated and taking pictures with the mayor and then leaving after a couple of years is leading to issues regarding the operating continuity of the projects. Attracting private capital is paramount. The public sector cannot do it all by itself. And as it's been mentioned, the investing conditions are improving, the quality of prices, and now we want to contribute with elements that will help improve the return on investment. A donor can contribute with additional elements in the market, and we will talk about it. We want to focus productive clusters, increase productivity and quality of products and services offered by communities, which will lead to an expansion of service into those communities and other communities that are nearby. We are focused on the productivity of production clusters, as goods and services clusters. This can lead to sustainable growth in terms of energy demand and an interest of investing in these projects. The point here is de-risking private capital, something donors can do. We must de-risk capital to attend this call for security because of distances, because of high costs of transportation and construction, and we must attain acceptance and participation in the project of the community. The projects that are not able to do this are condemned to fail. We are immersed in PVETs, working with communities, developing projects that are accepted by communities, and we must ensure capacity and payment capacity. And we are beginning a project that the productive clusters and PVETs, which, as we have said, is a challenge to get subsidies from the state. So we have to look at the progress made in the construction of the relationships and capabilities in the PVETs. But we have seen that PVETs, different type of producers, are working in areas with little energy or no electrical power, no power at all. And the USA model is based on technical assistance. In a large way, our role is technical assistance, trying to attain greater productivity, and this has to connect with markets in order to create more income, and that more income will give more capacity, and thus we will attain the financial sustainability for operators. This model is based on a portfolio, and this portfolio allows us to distribute costs throughout multiple projects. And this is by working with a portfolio that allows us to decrease cost, CAPEX, OPEX, admin, legal, community relations, etc. And now operator companies can work in different areas beyond their zones of influence. Is opening a door to us. Another approach for minimizing costs, which is also important, is the possibility to standardize generation technology throughout the portfolio with 9, 10, 12, or 15 projects, all using the same technology with a single operator, which allows us to decrease CAPEX and operating costs to a large degree. And this is also through aggregation. With a portfolio, you can aggregate contracts. Sorry, let me turn my phone off. And to increase return rates, we talk about USA catalyst capital to CAPEX to mitigate risks and increase the return rates to about 35 to 65% of the full portfolio CAPEX, which help us attract operators with demonstrating capacity to implement and operate the portfolio. We are aware of how important it is to include communities by training, teaching, opening jobs, helping them escalate the productive chain. But we see that it's necessary to bring capacity in design, implementation, operation, administration of power systems for communities so that we can truly ensure project sustainability. It is very important to offer assured sales. USAID is working with many anchor companies to guarantee purchase of products and services of the clusters with improved qualities and volumes for producers of cocoa, coffee, dairy, fish, and tourism products. Providing energy is one thing, but you have to train so they can improve their productive capacity, and they must be connected to the national economy through good prices, good volumes, ensuring that if they produce more and better, they will increase their sales, which will lead to an increase in income and well-being in turn. So from the donor perspective, we are talking about providing catalyst capital to CAPEX. We are talking about free feasibility studies, including design and budget, providing technical assistance for training productive clusters, and developing relations with communities in PDTs, trying to attain a catalyst effect that will translate in economic, environmental, and social benefits. And this contribution can be used. We can use capitalized resources from private investors and other donors to provide energy for 20,000 people in 9 PDTs municipalities focused on Afro-Colombian and indigenous populations, which will also focus on healthcare, schooling, and public lighting. And throughout the useful life of the project, there will be an increase in income for by about $40 million through an increase in sales and services. The useful life is 20 years, and this will be the effect on development. And this increase justifies the USAID's contribution. This will reduce the use of diesel and diesel subsidies from the state, and will accelerate the climate transition by reducing CO2 emissions by 552 tons a year. And this model can be improved. What we want is to offer a return on investment of about 20 to 25%. We consider, after a series of market research studies, we deem that these levels are the levels needed in order to attract the private sector. Here we have a view of the clusters and the increase in sales. And we have finished with the stage of identifying the clusters and the design of mini grids, the design of solutions and budgets, community relations at each site. And this month, we are beginning to hold meetings to choose implementing partners and developing implementation agreements so that we can contribute with capital and other assets. And that leads us to the next stage, final structuring with investors and other donors, and close. And hopefully by the beginning of next year, we will be able to implement the project. We invite companies, investors, and other donors to join this portfolio, to come and look at our portfolio. We have a master plan that will be published, and this has a full summary of all the technical, economic, social, and financial analysis. There's also a data room where you can see designs, budgets, financial analysis for every project, analysis in increase of demand, analysis of the portfolio, and those who want to enter the data room and want to access the master plan, just send a letter of intention, very brief. You can send it and you will have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Now I give the floor back, and thank you very much for giving me this chance to come and share with you this model in development with the objective of attracting the private sector to energize PDET communities, to bring this peace program and help us keep moving forward. Thank you very much. Thank you, Thomas. I give the floor to Javier Cuervo from IADB. Javier, yes. Thank you. Can you hear me?
¿Escuchan? Ah, bueno, perfecto. Voy a compartir la pantalla.
I'm going to share my screen.
¿Están viendo la presentación?
Can you see my presentation? No, not yet.
Un minuto, por favor.
1 minute, please.
No sé cómo hacer esto de la presentación nuevamente.
Let me try again to share.
¿Ahora?
Ahora sí.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, creo que no lo dejamos a colocar en la presentación.
Okay, so
¿La están viendo en nueva presentación?
can you see the slides?
No.
No. Entonces, un minuto, por favor. No, no logré encontrar cómo la coloco en nueva presentación. Entonces creo que están simplemente viendo el slide, el modo slide.
No, well, but you can see the slides, right?
Sí.
Bueno, mi nombre es Javier Cuervo, yo trabajo por el Banco
I am
Interamericano.
Javier Cuervo. I work at IADB.
Jefe del grupo de acceso
I am head of the group of access to resources.
Aló, estoy nuevamente con ustedes. ¿Aló? Presentación.
Hello?
Estoy en la presentación.
So I'm sorry, can you see the presentation?
Perfecto. No, pero es que me entró una llamada por el sistema interno de teléfono y
Now, we just wanted to confirm because I was receiving a call and I just wanted to make sure it was not interrupting the presentation. So just quickly, so basically the idea here is to give you a very general view of the function institutions like IADB have. I want to thank CEFIM and IPSE and Dr. Sosta for the invitation. IADB is a multilateral development bank. One of our pillars consists in working with countries to provide universal access to energy, respecting the principles of sustainability and financing. Let me explain a little of what we do, because through our work and through our instruments, we can truly understand our function and our role working with countries, with our clients, with Colombia, the government, and different private sector stakeholders who work in the energy sector, in regulation, diversification of energy sources, and participation of the private sector. Some of our figures are as follows. 2017 to 2019, Latin America was looking into a situation where it is easy to understand the functions of multilateral development banks such as IADB. Our window to the public sector is IDB, and the private sector IDB Invest, providing $1.1 billion of financing into the energy sector, where when we add other multilateral development entities, we are at about $2.7 billion, a little under 50% of financing. So what do we do? What is our function? This is very important to help limit the risk, which limits participation of the private sector. We find barriers, and there are many different barriers that can be well described in the first presentation from IPSE and the Ministry of Mining and Energy. So we work with countries to strengthen dialogue and technical assistance to help develop regulations. And I want to mention Colombia's regulatory framework and advancements because this is something that is beginning to happen in other countries. So what Colombia has done is going to help others. It's going to help us in our work with other countries. So we work a lot in dialogue and technical assistance, in policies. We provide lendings based on policy to support processes for the modernization of the legislation framework and knowledge, and a series of reports that you can consult by going into the ADB website. And the purpose here is to help. At the end of the day, this is about implementing projects, and project implementation must overcome all barriers. Our function as IADB is to provide technical assistance and financing. It's important to say that we are constantly looking for development partners. We've mentioned for example, climate financing, and we are constantly collaborating. We are constantly talking to entities beyond climate finance, international entities like Climate Fund, but also philanthropic organizations, because there's a huge challenge in Latin America. It's a huge challenge to bring international donors in access and electrification sectors for rural areas or faraway areas in Latin America. Our region in general is in a pretty good state compared to other parts of the developing world. And in terms of access to electrical power, we are at about 97% coverage compared to Africa. Some places, which is good, but it's then a challenge to bring investment for the electrification of areas such as the ZNIs, and we are looking for investment like multilateral financing funds. We have a series of collaborations with other entities, philanthropic organizations, Rockefeller and others. And everything we do is translated into projects. And the idea is to do financing with access through renewable energies, as we have done in several countries in the region. There is an example. We work with mini grids at all. Like in Suriname, we develop mini grids. And like Elias said, is one solution, not the only. There are many areas where the solution is still individual PV systems, and therefore planning becomes important. We are working with a few countries to prepare universal access georeference maps. We've developed this plan in Colombia. We're all finished one in Ecuador. We are working in Bolivia and Brazil as well to develop a regional platform where you can search information to find the best electrification solution for isolated, non-interconnected, faraway and rural areas. where you can see if the solution is extending the grid, a mini grid, or individual solutions. This is important. As previously mentioned, costs and sizing is very important when developing projects and when making decisions regarding financing to determine which projects can be undertaken. This comes from the Ecuador georeference map. This is an example of our work. The idea is to identify the minimum cost and best solution. As IADB, we have a function as to provide technical assistance. I want to finish with a slide. This is a survey in Haiti, and this is an example. We are trying to work on concessions for mini grids. Haiti is a unique country in Latin America due to the low coverage of electrical power at 40%. Other countries are above 90 or 80 or 90, but not Haiti. In Haiti, we are helping them develop a concession system where the idea is to open a competitive process to present the possibility of a concession to different operators with financing from IADB and through the government and other financing mechanisms from the private sector to develop concessions for designing, operating, and maintaining mini grids. So this is the scheme that, and we believe that it can work in many parts to attract private capital. There are a few in the region, but we have to work. We've been working on bids, and we are working also in Peru with some other mechanisms, and mini grids is a good option to bring operators into the sector. So that's what I came to present. I'm sorry because of the format of the presentation, but well, I am here, and if you have questions, I'll be here.
Thank you very much, Javier. I am going to give the floor to Fernando Carrero from Findetec. So if you want to leave your questions via the chat, please do so, and we will send them to the party that is going to answer. So welcome, Fernando. Hello, Alenka. Good morning, and good morning to all of you. Please let me know as soon as you can see my presentation. Not right now. We cannot see it.
No.
No. Let me see.
No sé por qué no. A ver. No sé. No la estás pudiendo ver, auxilio.
I don't know what's happening. I cannot share my presentation.
No, no la vemos.
No, we cannot see your presentation. Give me a minute, please.
Ahora sí.
Perfecto.
Now we can see it.
Bueno, buenos días a todos.
Good morning to all of you. As you all know, Findeter, as a National Development Bank, is a financial and technical instrument of the national government to support all those initiatives. In fact, our goal is to support the development of all the territories through a mechanism and a management model, including planning, structure, and investment alternatives, of course. So we are a very important stakeholder of the financial sector in issuing titles and in distributing resources. Nevertheless, taking into consideration, I would like to tell you that we have different sectors: transportation, energy sector, health, education, etc. We have lots of strategic sectors So this is what we do to fund projects all along the energy cycle, from the generation to the distribution and commercialization or trading. And specifically today, we have a very strong funding. I have been listening to all the presentations and the different topics of the DNP, the USAID, and the Ministry of Energy, and also the IPSE director, Jose, who I greet today, and all of you. So we have a very specific line that it's good to support all the initiatives that we have in the renewable energy sector, and specifically to fund projects in the non-interconnected zones, and obviously in the clean energy zone. So this is a line of compensated rate. I mean, we have a very important subsidy for the national government. So we have been a strategic partner for the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and the NINE, who is the one that is assessing the projects in order to assess these resources. So this is a funding line that goes to the IBD plus zero, which is quite a competitive rate for the funding and structuring of the project. The use of cities in investment. The intermediary margin is a discount line. We need financial intermediaries, and they have up to 400% basic points of what they evidence. But we have historically very low rates in the sector. We have this line, which is current. This is a new line that has all the resources available, 1.27 billion pesos. This is a multi-sector line, but this is an important item, almost 1.3 billion pesos. So as I was telling you, the beneficiaries are the private sector and the public sector. So the mechanisms of the term is up to 2 years. So this is a very ample, wide period in order to structure these kind of projects, investment, and we are able then to have the financial close on this. So we are going to be very attentive to the questions. How do we work as a bank? We always have resources in order to quote and to set the opportunities in these mechanisms. How do we operate in the rediscount system? Typically, it goes to 15 years. The specific lines are the ones that we have seen were at 12, but we always have financing or funding for public and private and all the sectors that I showed you, and we can address this opportunity. Our line is the customer together with us. We have a technical specific part as investment bank. We have a commercial team which is accompanying through the commercial intermediaries, and another kind of help so that we are able to have the feasibility of the projects. So we need a specific feasibility, which is set by the Energy Ministry, and we all the ones that are in the sector. I mean, we know about this, and this is a mechanism that we all know, but for the new stakeholders, we also coach them and we guide them in order to obtain the feasibility. For the case of the Mines and Energy Ministry, the 4393 legislation is the one applicable, and there we have all the mechanisms and the requirements and the mechanisms that we need to have in order to have these financial situations that are very favorable. So I would like to take advantage to say that if there are some concerns on how do we work, how is our line working, we are present in all the country, and this presentation is going to be shared with you so that you can share it with your participants, and you can find all our regional offices and all the help and the guidance that you may have in the regions, which is the Pacific, the Caribbean, the northwestern part, and all the influence zones. Fernando, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your presentation was not working, so it remained in the first slide. You are in the first slide. Oh, I am so sorry. I don't know what happened. Oh, you should have interrupted me. I don't know why or what happened. Let me see what happened here. Well, I don't understand what happened. Is it moving right now? Yes. Now you're changing. So you can see it there? Yes. Okay, I think that the most important slide is this one, which is the Reactiva line, which is called the rediscount program, and it has 1.27 billion pesos available. This is a new line that has been just launched into the market. The conditions, it's a rediscount rate. I mean, the cost of the money that is attributed by Findeter, it starts from the IBR plus 0.8% up to 12 years of amortization. And this is a line which is for the public and private sectors, so that you can have an idea of the $1 billion that Findeter places on a yearly basis. 70% goes to the private sector to invest in the infrastructure in all the sectors that Findeter is devoted to. And of course, we also provide some attention to the public sector. So welcome all of you. I think that this was the most relevant part of the presentation. There are funding sources. Findeter has resources, subsidized and competitive resources through the rediscount. I think that was the most important part of the presentation, and the presentation is available for you if you want to share it with all your attendees. So I think that it's maybe important if we have some questions. Thank you very much. The meeting is going to be recorded in Spanish and in English in the CEFIM and IPSE web pages. And likewise, we will make available the presentations for all the attendees if they are in need to do so. I have a last presentation from Bancolombia. So we are going to give the floor to Santiago Montoya so that he can explain to us which is the current overview of the renewable projects funding from the standpoint of the commercial bank, and then we will go to the Q&A session. Santiago, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Can you see me? Because I am in my cellular phone. Yesterday, I was told about this presentation, and I do not have any presentation to share with you, but I would like to share with you some ideas on the interconnected zones, non-interconnected zones funding project. So we have, for example, in Iniria, the experience of the funding of two hybrid projects, the PV and the thermal energy, where our coaching on that project was very hard. We started from the structuration of the ESINC team, specifically with the energy cell. We had the experience of changing the paradigms around the funding of that kind of projects. First of all, we had to understand understand the mechanisms that you have been speaking about in this workshop on how do we structure the rates, how are the subsidies, and how are we going to collect the customers. So with this, we have been able to understand in depth this type of sectors or specific areas and the behavior of all those in order to change the paradigms from the inside and to be able to develop funding models that are more focused to the project finance, so that in order to understand and leverage these kind of solutions, we have to evolve and update those financial models and to have the risk of assuming that the project is able to leverage or to deliver all the guarantees in order to develop funding. That's on the first place. Now, the challenging part here, and these models and to coach or to help the customers, it has to do with logistics. I think that the risks that are associated to this, logistics has a paramount role before the mechanisms for risk evaluation because of the areas or the zones where we are located, because it's not very easy to get to those not interconnected zones. And logistics makes for the timing, the development of the project and the commitment that we have to be restated, as well as the costs that are associated to the project, because it's very different to carry out a project inside the country. I mean, that in the near area that in the remote areas in the south of Colombia. Obviously, because we have to fly there sometimes. Sometimes you can access in some parts of the year by ship, and the highways are almost impossible to be used. So this increases the cost, the operation costs, the maintenance costs, and this is a very important topic that we have to take into consideration to assess the financial models. I think that with the perspective that we have today, and because of the situation of the dollar, because it's starting to increase the cost of the project, because it's gaining some terrain here, and the specific condition and situations that we have set in the law in order to set the rates, this plays also a very relevant role, because as I was telling you, cash flow of the projects are being impacted. If we do not have clear conditions on how we are going to pay or how are we going to have those payment flows to fund the projects, this is going to create uncertainty. And moreover, if the financial models are so stressed with the very small margins that are related to the capex and the logistics, etc., and if the rates that we have are not helping us to cover all the costs, well, we are not going to have very well financial closure. So this is the most important topics that we have in the non-interconnected zones. We think that these kind of fora are very positive, because we have different stakeholders, different guilds in the sector, and they are looking forward to having the dynamics of sustainable, renewable projects, specifically in the development of energy in the specific area. We would like to stress out the work that Colombia is doing through this funding in order to develop energy models, because I think that these are very innovative, and we have new practices that they are developing before funding models for these zones. And additionally, these transactional models that are different and that we are developing inside Colombia with pilot projects that are very interesting. I mean, they are modeling them according to the non-interconnected zone. So these are the most important points that I have heard all along this workshop, and of course the experience that we have had from Colombia to fund this type of projects. Thank you very much, Santiago, for your comments. We have some more minutes for a Q&A session. Are there any questions from the attendees? We have been answering some questions. Reynaldo Escudero, you have the floor right now. If you want to make a question, please raise your hand. Reynaldo Escudero. Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity and such an excellent initiative. My name is Reynaldo Escudero, and I am representing Big Mac Energy in Mexico. And I have a question, a very specific question. We are interested in developing initiatives in this. We kindly ask you to close your microphones.
Camilo, perdón.
Camilo,
Gracias.
Thank you very much. My specific question is, what's the route map? We are interested and we are willing to do it, but how do we have to do it? Who is going to give us the right information about the zone, the areas, about the rates, the subsidies? Where do we get that information, and how do we start, or how can we do to develop all this process? Because Thomas was very emphatic that and stressed out that they have done some studies and we can work together with those that are willing to do so. But if that's the case, if we are willing to do so, and if we have our own contributions and we would like to develop them, who is the first point of contact that we have to go to? Who is going to tell us, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to develop, this is the information that you need, this is the feasibility, etc. I mean, that is a very specific question that we have today. Thank you very much. If you allow me, regarding the mini grid investment portfolio that I was talking about, I have included my email address so that I can send you all the information. We have a highly qualified team, highly experienced team in Colombia that has structured the whole project, and they understand everything about subsidies, rates, regulations. That, as you were well mentioning, is a huge challenge. Outside of our portfolio, ELIPSE is the first place that you have to address to so that they can answer your questions. Thank you very much. Yes, I think that those that are interested in developing any kind of project in the non-interconnected zones can go to the ministry or to IPSE, and we will give you the information according to your needs. If you need information, feasibility, funding mechanisms, etc., and we will support you, and we will let you know what to do in order to submit submit all your documentation. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much for your answer. Are there any further specific questions? There is a question in the chat. I can answer these questions. Are there other organizations similar to USAID but in other countries, like for example Germany, etc.? Yes, almost all the countries that are part of what we call the donors. We have and the United States is one of those donors, Great Britain, France. Almost all these countries have bilateral development agencies, and we work with many of those agencies for the co-funding of the projects. In the case of the USAID, we are working together in the development of mini grids in Haiti in an industrial farm. So with different initiatives, different sectors, we work together with all these entities. But what is very interesting is that recently there have being launched, some philanthropic activities, like, for example, the Rockefeller Foundation and some other philanthropic entities that are coming from IKEA and the Bezos Foundations from the Amazon. They created the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planning. One of the things that we do as a BID is to bring them here so that they can study, because this is going to be applied to you cannot apply this for all the 26 countries. So part of the development is to identify the opportunities of new stakeholders and new partners, so that when we discuss programs and projects with the government and other counterparties, we take into consideration not only the funding possibility of the BID, but also bilateral funding, like the ones that I have mentioned to you, but also with new entities and organizations that are appearing in the market. Thank you very much, Javier. Are there any further questions? Well, so I think that we can now go to the close. Oh, I'm sorry, Jose Montenegro, you have the floor. Yes, good morning. I would like to tell you a little bit about the coaching that the IPSE can give us when we would like to present a project. Which are the channels to communicate with you? I mean, the emails, the phone numbers, etc. Yes, of course, Jose. Right now, we are going to write down on the chat all the contacts, the emails of IPSE, and likewise in the presentations that you are going to have on the web pages from the OECD as well as IPSE. You will have the presentations, and at the end of the presentation, you have the contacts of all the entities. Okay, thank you very much. Well, if there are no further questions, we are going to formally close this meeting, and I'm going to give you the floor to the IPSE director. You have the floor. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for this forum, to all the participants, the organizers, obviously for the support, the CEFIM, the OECD. Thomas, thank you very much for the participation of Indeter, Javier from the mining ministry, to all the private persons that share their experiences for the non-interconnected zones. I think that these kind of panels are paramount, not only because they are telling us and we tell you what we have been doing and what have been our achievements, but we come to be aware of some situations that we don't know what's happening.
Ok, alguien con el micrófono prendido.
Creo que es la internet.
Ah, ok. Listo. Entonces, quería concluir dándole las gracias.
I would like to conclude by thanking all those that connected during this time, and I would like to invite you, as we did from the beginning, to get to know all the interconnected zones. As we have been telling you, we have thousands of opportunities, not only in install capacity, but also in the consolidation of all this. We hope that you continue with us in this type of events. As Elenka was saying, the contact data are available, our networks, our emails, so that you, as well as all the stakeholders, can have access to all this information. But you can be in touch with the entity, and with this we can mobilize more investment. Because when I answer the question of the CREG about the hybrid projects, I missed to tell you that since the CREG is moving this, we are trying to get a regulatory model to the interconnected zone. So they are going to know that today with the regulation, they can ask for a rate. The way in what we have been operating in the hybrid parks in Colombia is precisely through the regulatory model, the current regulatory model. I mean, we have been updating the model, and we have been addressing some regulatory gaps that we have mentioned, but with the regulation nowadays, we can overcome this with the current models, and it's good and they are worth to improve energy quality in the whole country. I would like to finish with that comments, and I would like to thank you once again, and I hope that we continue connected, you with the Institute and all the interconnected zones. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much, Mr. Director. Now, I am going to give the floor to the OECD so that they can give us their final message.
Taking the time to share their perspectives on the current market for clean energy in distributed renewable energy in non-interconnected zones. So thank you very much for this time. We really appreciate hearing your comments. And this is all very important for us to be able to shape recommendations and help provide support to the Colombian government. So once again, thank you, and the video recording will be made available of this full session. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos los participantes. Damos por terminado este workshop.
Well, thank you very much to all the participants. So we are wrapping up. I remind you that the recording in both languages are going to be available, as well as the deck of presentations. The email is in IPSE has already been written in the chat. So thank you very much to all of you, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Gracias, hasta luego.
Hasta luego.